My name is Megan LaFlamme. I'm the Director of Product Marketing for our secure networking products that run on our managed platform, the HashiCorp Cloud Platform. And I'm here to talk about Zero Trust security and introduce some important concepts that we'll discuss today around identity-based security for applications, networks, and people. And so I'll do a brief intro here, and then I'll hand things over to my colleague, Rob Barnes, who is in person today, who's going to go in depth across the solution set and share some demos with you today. All right, so kicking things off. First, just to sort of set the stage here, HashiCorp helps companies standardize their cloud operating model for the shift to multi-cloud and modern data center environments. And we offer solutions that support that transition across infrastructure, security, networking, and application delivery. So in terms of who we serve, we're really built on the concept of open source, and we see huge adoption across practitioners that are looking to standardize workflows, either for deploying infrastructure, secrets management, service networking. And we've also become the go-to for zero trust security for many of the largest enterprises in the world. And for security in the cloud operating model, this shift is in a focus from a really high trust or IP-based authorization and access model to a low trust model where everything is predicated on identity. So at HashiCorp, we believe that zero trust security is predicated on securing everything based on identity. And to do that effectively, there's really 4 key pillars to address. And when you combine all 4, that allows you to authenticate and authorize users and machines really at all layers of a dynamic network based on that identity. So on the far side of the spectrum, you have human identity. Ultimately, this boils down to single sign-on, as well as having that common directory of employees and what groups they're in. So I can say that this is a set of database administrators, for example. And then working from the left, first we have Vault, and that's really what provides that sense of application identity. So that allows us to clearly define what is a web server, what is a database, or what is an API, and then define authorization rules on top of that. And once we define a web server, for example, we can use that for secrets management so that a web server can get access to an API token just in time. And then Console is HashiCorp's service networking solution that addresses that challenge, that communication challenge around acting as a central control plane where we can define these central routing rules that say that API is allowed to talk to this web server. And then Boundary is our secure remote access solution. This has been in market for a couple of years, open source, and we just recently launched an enterprise managed version, which focuses on secure access to infrastructure for technical users in particular. So you can establish which systems users can access based on identity and ensure that session data is always secure. But first, I just want to use this session to reorient around zero trust security and what that next phase looks like in identity-based security. So first, it really starts with that shift to the cloud. So when we think about the traditional approach for securing data centers and on-prem, it was much simpler, where everything was really defined by static physical attributes like servers, switches, and that clear network perimeter. We call that a castle and moat approach, where access was controlled through single points of entry and exit. And in this model, there's that distinct binary where everything outside the network is bad, so to speak, and everything inside the network is good and has access to just about everything. And then in this more dynamic and hybrid focus, what we're looking at here is a much more dynamic view where there's no clear network perimeter, infrastructure is continuously deployed, and network addresses are constantly changing. So without that trusted perimeter, there's no method for access, and securing data becomes a lot more challenging. And ultimately, you can't trust anything and need to assume that there's already been a breach. These challenges are, shown in some of the challenges around the manual overhead to manage securing applications and networks in this more dynamic environment. As you see here, like 82% of breaches involve a human element. So there's a need to automate key parts of the workflow to keep up with this new paradigm. And as a sort of recap, so whether you're migrating to a private cloud or multiple clouds, or some combination, this traditional standpoint of securing networks and firewalls with those IP-based perimeters really starts to fall apart. In this modern data center world where everything needs to dynamic and ephemeral access, with HashiCorp, our zero trust security solutions, we see through the lens of securing all of your apps, networks, and people based on that identity. And everything is authenticated, every action is authorized, and data is always protected. So now we're looking at every logical entity, whether it's a web app or an engineer or a database or a load balancer, with that identity that allows us to authenticate it across platforms. So let's talk about identity a little bit and what that looks like. So, before, legacy identity was a little simpler. Applications were secured based on static IP addresses over trusted networks. There was typically one login system, like AD, for users to access systems. And we assumed that networks were trusted. But identity has become much more complex with the explosion of so many applications and network components and cloud-based systems. So you could literally have hundreds of things creating identities and networks across these different hardware and software, so many different ways that users need to authenticate into things. And something now that is new is that there's also these cloud identities with their own identity management systems. So you really need an identity broker to sort of unify identity for apps and networks and users across all of this tech. For us, this is where Vault comes into play. HashiCorp really simplifies all this down and unifies all of these identities into a single platform, which is Vault, and really brokers identity across apps, networks, and users across all of those platforms and data centers. And then ultimately you secure everything based on that trusted identity. So how does this all come together, and how does identity help us secure this modern infrastructure? It's really about securing access and protecting data, most simply put. So the first step is wanting to establish application identity, authentication, and authorization. And this ensures that apps can access other apps and databases, but also the application data is always secure, both in transit and at rest. When we talk about secrets management, which Rob will dive more deeply into, it's really the idea of how do you centrally store and protect secrets across all these clouds and data centers. And that could be anything from tokens or passwords, certificates, or encryption keys. The list really goes on. And then from there, it's important to secure networks and services to ensure which services can access others or be reached, as well as network traffic, ensuring that that is secure. So if someone is ultimately on the network who shouldn't be, they don't get access through packet sniffing or something similar. And then finally, you can broker identity for users for secure remote access and establish which system those users can access based on their identity, such as permitting database administrators to access certain databases and have certain access rights within them, and also ensure that session data is always secure. So just to recap, HashiCorp has been in the business for a while of zero trust security. We have over 3,000 companies across the globe who have started their zero trust security journey with HashiCorp.